Hello, I'm Charlie Hubble, and today I will be presenting my analysis of Menuett F Dur by Alban Berg. This translates to Minuet in F minor. It's a piece by Alban Berg, and it's surprising because this is in fact a tonal piece, despite Alban Berg being very well known with his companion Webern for doing set class notation and also 12-tone pieces. This is a very traditional, as far as Berg goes, it's a very traditional minuet, very traditional style. You see it's in 3/4 at a moderate tempo, and as we go throughout the piece, we're going to see that it's in a binary form. But just for the overview here, A section repeated, B section starting at that repeat and then going down here, also repeated, rounded binary form. We'll talk about a little bit later as the A section does show up again at the end. So now, to start breaking down this piece, there were a couple things that I noticed immediately. The first thing is this chromatic line happening, not chromatic line, this, what I've begun referring to as the trickle, right here. These two back to back. So I would say that this is one iteration of the trickle, this is a second. As you can see, it starts with this C, goes down a half step to a B natural, back up to C, down a whole step, back up to C. And we see a figure like this many times throughout the piece. So here is the first iteration. This is another very standard iteration. I also see it happening here in an ornamented form. As you see, this holds over, would resolve to a G in this chord, the 2/7 of F major, which is the piece that the key is in. The 2/7 would resolve to a G, which would give us the half step, back up, whole step down, and then continue on. So this is another version of the trickle. A third version can be found here with the C, half step down, and then rising up. This version will become very much more important later in the B section when we look at that. But for now, let's move on to the melody. Looking at the soprano here, we can easily see that we've kind of got three parts here. We got soprano, an alto / tenor-ish type of thing, and then the bass here. So in the soprano carries the melody throughout most of the piece, except during the B section. The soprano has a couple of funky-looking embellishments here, which aren't very typical. These neighbor tones down here, passing tones later in the piece, are very, very typical throughout these eighth note run sections. Right here we have an escape tone and an appoggiatura, a suspension 4/3, which is very standard. But I'm really curious as to why these incomplete neighbors are here. And I think this is where we begin to see some of Berg's special method of combining things that make sense, but not in a traditional sense. So for example, G to C, by itself we think perfect. That is a leap of a perfect fourth. We love to see that. However, it's all over an F chord. There's no denying it. An F chord, the one chord in the key of F major, fits these two bars perfectly, like a glove. And so we say, okay, why is this escape tone here? Well, it's because it makes sense for a G to go up to a C. It makes sense to resolve that up by perfect fourth. You know what I mean? So here, I have a similar thing. We have a skip and an arpeggio. We say, okay, well, maybe that's an A minor arpeggio. Maybe that's a minor 3 chord. Not likely, especially not with this F in the bass. I hesitate to call it a major 7 because we have this E flat happening at the same time here. But it does make sense that this E natural would progress up to an F. That makes sense. It's the leading tone. We would expect to find that here. And this is where we start to get into some more of the chord changes. We see a secondary dominant here, which is just a very, very wonderful thing to see because it shows added tension. It's not something you would maybe expect to find from Berg, known for some more radical ideas, but we're going to get there. So then we see end of the first phrase here. We have an imperfect authentic cadence. Very typical to begin a piece like that, and we would expect that a second phrase would round this out with a more perfect cadence toward the end of the A section. So we go down the A section here, and we see, okay, we've scrolled down just a tiny bit, and we see, okay, he ended with another IAC, so that means it's not a period. It's like that's a bit confusing to me at this point, but I think it makes sense with what he does later in the piece. So we can see, I like how he transitions the first phrase into the other here. He's got a suspension here that leads into a huge run down that continues even through here when it starts arcing back up again. But as this run descends down, he starts another arpeggio right where the second phrase starts and proceeds to run that down with the trickle, trickle here, cadence. And I think that's a very, very interesting method of linking the two phrases together. And I wonder if we'll see it again in the future. Maybe we will. So A section, of course, gets repeated, and then we're on to the B section. So the B section uses that form of the trickle that we talked about earlier. So this right here is what I'm calling we'll call it the augmented trickle. So what we have is an F down to an E, half step, F down to E, half step, then F sharp, G, A. So this chromatic little upswing here is why I'm going to call this an augmented trickle, because it starts very distinctively. Our ears will be able to recognize this half step down because we've heard it a bunch of times before. So we recognize this and we say, oh, where's it going? That's destabilizing. That excites us. We don't know what's happening, and it's what we'd expect to find out of the beginning of a B section. So we have this run here, something similar here. We still have the chromatic upswing happening here. But what I'd like to point out at this point is the soprano above it. This dotted quarter 3/8 pattern. Together, these two ideas are very similar to what we saw in the beginning, with a lot of eighth notes in the trickle, and then the dotted quarter 3/8 pattern. And what we see is that these two bars get repeated in a sequence 3 times, and you see through here there's a lot of different chords. So we go to one chord goes to a 5/7 of the 5 chord thanks to that E flat there. Get the 4 chord, then the 2 chord maybe, with a lot of appoggiatures and strange things happening here that we don't really expect. Then we go to the 6, very much out of nowhere, and in the 6/4 inversion at that, which doesn't make much sense at all. If we're trying to establish a key here, we'd expect Beethoven, Handel, all of them would have established a key to have established that, okay, we were in the home key, now we've gone somewhere else. Where's that establishment? Well, we continue on. What we eventually find after the harmonies get real funky in here, we have like almost an entire bar of anticipation here, trying to get back to the 5 chord. We hit this imperfect authentic cadence here, and then immediately afterwards hit the minor 1 chord. And I would be utterly confused if it wasn't Berg, because for Berg, well, I'm saying, okay, maybe there wasn't actually a cadence there, and I go back and I see, okay, this still looks like the sequence that we've been experiencing before with the trickle, and then, I'm sorry, I jumped a line. This still looks like the trickle and then the cadence. This is F, E natural. This looks like the trickle, then the cadence. We get to here, so I gotta say, okay, maybe this sequence was not completely finished. Maybe I gotta go more. Then we get this minor 1 chord, shocking, runs down, all the way down. Remember how we had this huge run here to link the 2 phrases? Well, Berg does a similar type of thing here with a rundown linked these 2 phrases, and here we actually get a perfect authentic cadence in the home key, which is surprising because it's not only the first perfect authentic cadence that we have, but it doesn't establish a different key as we would expect it to in the B section. After this point, A is largely repeated, but it does stand to mention that it really tends to feel like we're complete here. And this A phrase just is icing on the cake. There are a couple things to mention as far as things that Berg almost does that I find interesting. The first thing is there's almost a Phrygian half cadence here because he's trying to build up, okay, we said here, maybe this 5 of the 5 chord, maybe that's a half cadence, maybe we're in C major now. Oh wait, no, we went straight to the I6, okay, maybe we're still in F, but then, oh wait, no, that's F minor. Okay, hold on a second. Well, this resolves down by half step, a minor chord. That looks like the 6 to the 5 chord in the key of C minor. So that doesn't even make any sense. But I think eventually the best explanation now is that with this chromatic line, especially this B natural to B flat, makes it feel like we've gone past where we should because we'd expect that B natural to go back up to a C. B flat finally drags us back down with this chromatic line, this B flat to this A here, and our PAC in the home key. I have completely gone off script at this point, so let me make sure I didn't miss anything major. it's not a hard limit. So I just want to make sure that we got this. Yeah. There's a couple other things in the piece, in the paper, that are interesting to mention. But for now, that is all I have for you. Thank you.